hand tool rescue. Today we have one of the most glorious of all machines ever made, the gas-powered washing machine. I picked this up, strangely enough, on my way back from a Power Hammer event in Montana. It was only an 8-hour drive from where I live, so I went down there. I met up with Andrew from Blacksmith Tools and Jimmy DeResta for the first time. All three of us meeting was at that location. So this was about 2 years ago that I picked this up. I was in my wife's station wagon, so it was really weird. I just drove past it and immediately pulled over and asked the guy at the door, "What's up with this? Do you want to sell it?" And he was fine for selling it to me for, I think it was like $25, just because it was such a poor condition. I said, "Of course. How dare you offer me such an amazing price?" And I shoved it in the car and took it back home. It chilled in my workshop for almost 2 years while I prepared to find the engine that matched this. So I actually found this before I found the engine that I restored previously. So very exciting to finally have time to get to this specific tool, because it is just so interesting and amazing and kind of a sign of the times. This model, I believe, is a 1927 model. It might be 1929. There's a little discrepancies with this model. I don't know if some people messed with some parts. I don't know. But anyways, it's the 20s that this was made. Late 20s for sure. And it does look like it. The condition of everything is not very good at all. Lots of rust, lots of dirt, lots of corrosion. And the whole thing is seized. Nothing moves. I can't move this lever right here. I can't move the rollers really. I can't move the agitator in the tub. And nothing in the gearbox seems to move at all. I do believe this one may have originally been an electric version. I'm not exactly sure how to tell the difference other than the mounting brackets that were already on the washing machine when I got this. Regardless, I just kind of went like crazy and attacked everything that could move at once, and then started focusing on the things that couldn't move. So I'm just taking the handle off, undoing some screws and bolts as I can. There was no flow like it usually is with a restoration, where when you take one part off, it just leads to the next part and the next part. This was pure torture. Bolts were breaking, screws were stripped, things were rusted together beyond, like, just look at this. Things were just rusted beyond any any acceptable level. And on top of that, I didn't know, based on the corrosion, what was missing, what wasn't missing, what was damaged. It was all just an insane bucket of work and rust. So I just focused on doing what I do best, and that's making things move that should be moving, so that I can further disassemble things as much as possible. This part here, this bracket that holds the ringer shaft up, is obviously broken. That will need to be either replaced or braced back together, as these parts are just cast iron. So that is something that's already on the list of things that need major fixing, along with the rollers that you saw previously. It's kind of hard to find new rollers, so I'll have to sort that out when I can. There is an oil cup here, and this kind of confused me because the rest of everything else takes grease. So it took me a while to kind of sort out why this part takes oil, and you'll see it later in the video. It's for the gear and the basically like the rack and pinion that drive the agitator. Apparently that needs oil and not grease, for whatever reason. Who knows what Maytag was up to in the 20s. I do believe that sometime in the 20s or 30s, the 6 millionth washer was built, or the millionth washer was built. So these are fairly popular devices for the time. It's just a matter of how many actually survived. Parts are still somewhat more available than your usual tool restoration. There is a big community, just like it was with the engine. There's a big community behind these that still have parts when you need them, but finding the actual parts that are always deteriorated, like rollers and agitators and things like that, are much harder to find since everybody needs and wants those. In here that I'm trying to get to is the main gearbox. It should be filled with grease, like a heavy, I think kind of an oily grease. More flowy than normal modern grease at this point. But you can see there's something else growing in there. That's not really an effective way to store your washing machine. Although a lot of people had these outside, just because they obviously create fumes. So this may be in the barn or a side part of the home that you wouldn't normally want to have a lot of gas fumes in. They also came with a really long exhaust hose with a ball at the end of the hose, and that ball had holes in it or a slot in it, and that basically reduced the sound significantly, but you could reduce the sound even further by burying the end of the hose in the ground. That would get rid of the fumes to some extent and keep the noise down significantly. So you could run it inside your house as long as you had that hose going outside, so you don't die of carbon monoxide poisoning. Which of course isn't really a modern issue with washing machines. You don't really hear that. There isn't a warning label on it, since they're all electric. This here is the other part of the machine that gave me a lot of anger, just because these parts are supposed to move and they're not moving, and it drives me crazy because when I apply a lot of force to things and they're still not moving, I get very anxious and concerned that there is a reason, like a piece of steel or a pin, or it's attached to a gear and I'm just shearing the tooth off. It stresses me out. And that's why this pin, or the shaft that I'm hammering out here, I know it's supposed to move up and down. I know from a manual that I have that it is a separate component, but I don't exactly know what parts it touches and doesn't touch, because it's just kind of an exploded view in my literature that I found. So everything, I'm just trying to take it easy. If I break things, I'm going to cry because, like I was saying before, parts aren't very easy to find. Look how amazing that wrench functions. It's just so interesting. This is actually the first wrench I ever made. It's still there. It's still bent. The jaw is bent from me doing the torque test to see how much it would take before it bends. So I guess it's forever bent, or maybe I should bend it back. It was like 120 foot-pounds of torque, I think, over 6 inches, which is enough. So this thing spins in a circle, as most things that spin do, and that engages and disengages the agitator and positions it in different rotations. So it'll turn right and then turn left, so it has that kind of twisty motion to agitate the water in the clothes as fancy as possible. I believe Maytag actually patented the gyrator phrase for this style of agitator. But obviously now we have a different method. So the main leg and the main gearbox is finally off. Let's crack this baby open and kind of see what's in there. It should be fairly disgusting. Who knows really when the last time this specific unit was run. It really cannot be. It cannot be a short time ago. This stuff is. There's some rust here, like that deep rust in the main gearbox that just signals a long time sitting around doing nothing. The deeper the pitting, usually the older the rust. This lever right here is what engages on or off the agitator. You can have it not spinning when you're loading something in, and then you can turn it on as you need it. You can shut it off when you need to use the ringer or something like that. This is the view from the bottom of the tub, so I flipped it upside down, and all I'm doing here is breaking screws and bolts because these are actually brass screws. Any fastener that is exposed to the inside of the tub is made of brass. So that's good. That is nice because water would obviously rust them away. The only issue is that kind of the corrosion and the difference in metals between the aluminum and the brass leads to some corrosion that over time weakens these fasteners, and that's why a lot of them are breaking. There's also lead washers on either side of the brass screws, very similar to the lead washers that were in the Maytag engine carburetor assembly. They're probably exactly the same since they are made by the same company. So you got to watch out for that. You know, there's just always a little bit of hazard with older tools. There are also gaskets around the ring of where these brass screws are. They could be made of asbestos or contain asbestos. Who knows? So I just kind of make sure that everything is oiled or kept wet so I don't have to have a major exposure to any of that stuff. It may not even contain asbestos. I just don't know. So I just spray it all and make sure it's safe because it stresses me out, and you'll see me do that very shortly. Just tapping the brass screws out, seeing which ones I can save and which ones are garbage. This one's obviously way less in length than it needs to be, so that one's toast. Unfortunately, I'll have to make new ones or find replacements. There's the gaskets. It looks just kind of like paper, so I'm not entirely sure, but I'm just oiling it to be safe. That's just penetrating oil anyways. The pulley looks to be in good condition, and most notably, it's not bent. It's not a wobbly pulley. That would frustrate me, but pulleys are very easy to obtain nowadays at you know, your hardware store, so it's not the end of the world. But keeping the original pulley is exciting, because then I don't have to buy that stuff. This is just the belt guard, and now this is the main gearbox. So my concern was that it was frozen. The whole machine wouldn't move because something in here was either corroded to insanity, or a tooth was broken or missing, or the whole gear was shattered. I am concerned greatly about the contents of this gearbox. So I am taking it easy, smashing it violently with hammers, and just trying to get in there as gently as humanly possible. Because I feel like I'm going to break something when I do this. But, you know, if you take it easy, it'll be fine. There's also another gasket here that could be poisoned, so we don't know. And there we have the deepest black in the known universe. It might be Nutella. I'm not entirely sure. The taste test is also kind of adequate for making sure if it is or isn't Nutella. And it definitely is in this case. So that's easy to fix. we just use some bread and we wipe it clean and then eat the bread after. As you can see here, the thickness of the grease, it's almost like an oily grease, and it actually moves. So this part, obviously not corroded, so we can not stress about that part. We just need to stress about figuring out how to clean this insane amount of grease out of here. I don't really know if this was the normal amount of grease. I believe in one of the manuals I have, they're supposed to add a pound of grease. But I haven't really found the right grease for this yet, so I'm still on the hunt for the proper grease, the Maytag grease. I'm sure I'll find it one day. Otherwise, I'll just use a replacement modern grease. So there is the glorious gear and worm gear thing. They're in obviously fantastic condition because they've been bathed in delicious Nutella for their entire life. So don't really have to worry about corrosion on this. I'm just going to clean this up and make sure that every tooth is there and there aren't chunks of steel in the gearbox at all. So now I'm about to do something drastic and also stupid, and I will explain why very shortly. I need to remove this because it's blocking me from pulling out the rest of what's attached to it, and that's the gearbox on the right of the screen. With this out, I can pull everything off and finally get it apart. And this is kind of necessary, at least I think it's necessary, to get to this part. But then, I don't know why I didn't just do this initially. I really thought, based on the diagrams that I have, that there was a pin in place around, kind of pinning in place a collar, and you can see the kind of collar, the 3 inches of collar at the end of the shaft, the round part, that I thought that would block it from coming out. I thought that collar was larger than the diameter of the hole that I pulled this out of. So I thought I had to drill it off because it did have an excessive amount of brazing around it, so it looked like a repair to me, and it was a repair, but I just didn't think it would come off by just tapping it out. And when I tried earlier to do that, it didn't really move at all, like at all. To me, it felt like there was a pin right through the whole thing. So I decided to drill it out. Clearly, I didn't need to do that. So that was a waste of time and effort. I will have to replace that or repair that significantly. Just enough so we don't have that big brazed washer end on it anymore. It just needs to be lightly larger than the hole that it goes in. Just for repairing purposes for the future person, since I failed on that aspect. I'm undoing or kind of loosening the tension on the spring that controls the tension of the rollers. This spider's trying to ruin my life. And the springs are in fine condition. I don't need to replace those. They're still springing around, so that's fine. The bearings on this are wooden, and is that original? No, not at all. They had very specifically designed bearings, ball bearings, so those are gone, obviously, and I will need to either replace them with modern bearings if I can find the right size, or try and find the original bearings. That might be tough, but maybe it'll come with the roller if I ever find new rollers. This is the drain or filling up tube. The hose is just made of nice, delicious rubber, and the little joint here is filled with an insane amount of dirt and sand for whatever reason. I don't know if they were washing potatoes in this thing. It just seems aggressive. But that's the way it is. Now, this machine has more parts than anything I have taken apart previously. more than the bandsaw teeth setters, more than the blade sharpeners, which are usually fairly complicated. This is more parts than the chainsaw or the power hammer. This one wins. This one almost killed me in terms of keeping my mind organized on how to put this all back together, because I did film as much as I could, but the thing was so large that I didn't catch everything on camera I was taking apart, so it's hard to go back. And there wasn't really a lot of video evidence online of someone taking one apart, so it's all just me and my brain this time. The paint does look like a light gray, and that does match what I found online in terms of what this era of Maytag should have. And I'm going to paint it a very similar color, just to keep that part original. It's 100% lead paint, so I am removing as much as possible before I sandblast everything, and I mean pretty much everything. It's intense. This is probably 10 hours of sandblasting. You gotta taste the window. 10 hours of sandblasting just to get everything done. It was just ridiculous. Now, out of the evaporust, all the small parts, they get their usual wire wheel and oil coating just to secure them for life in that delicious oil. And we go to the tub. The tub has major cracks at the bottom due to corrosion, and I'm just going to try to remove and clean up the tub as much as possible. I switched to the drill press because I just needed more power, guys. Come on. I don't have time. It's a tiny drill. Eventually, I just use an angle grinder. I would have loved to sandblast the whole thing, but it doesn't fit in my sandblaster. I don't think I'm going to paint the aluminum tub. It's just amazing. That much aluminum pre-World War II is not very common and fairly expensive originally. So I just want to show that off. I would hate to paint that entire tub. Even though original, I don't know. It hurts. It hurts me. I like showing off the aluminum. Even if I can't polish it, it just looks good. These were parts I couldn't get off before the rust soaking, so I'm taking my time to get them out now that the rust soaking and the sandblasting has happened. This is just kind of the end of where a shaft would be, and there's a bronze bushing in there as well. It's just a cap. I guess you could drain the grease very quickly if you pulled that plug out, or it's removable so that you can, I guess, replace the bushing maybe? I'm not sure. Here you can see the actual gear that drives the agitator and the agitator plate behind it, and the actual shaft itself. This has been soaking for a few days to see if I could get these pins out, and this one just did not want to move. Some of these might be tapered pins, and I looked in the manual to see which ones were and which ones weren't, but I don't know, this one fought me to the death. Anyways, this is a brass square cap on the shaft. The shaft will need to be fully replaced. It's incredibly pitted. That shaft would be the first thing that gets exposed to water if you happen to fill it up a little too much. So it is heavily corroded as well. Here we are getting the cast aluminum welded. It's very tough. I did not weld this. I don't have a TIG welder, never mind a TIG welder that has AC capabilities to weld aluminum. So I had All in Metalworks here locally in Saskatoon helping with this, which is fantastic because I could probably weld up aluminum fairly easily with that short learning curve, but cast aluminum is a pain. There's a lot of air pockets and it creates a much tougher job of welding. This also made me realize that I should think about purchasing a TIG welder. I just haven't, because most of my welding ends up being kind of MIG-related crappy little fixes, and any real brazing or things like that with cast iron, I end up using the torch to weld it. So maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to get a nice TIG welder. This is the new to me metal lathe, which I don't really know how to use properly. With aluminum, I'm not used to cutting that, but apparently if I cut in the wrong direction, which is away from the chuck, it produced a much better cut than when I cut the other way. Probably because my tool bit isn't lined up properly and angled accordingly. It's fine in the sense that a rougher cut would actually be better in this case, because this part is the agitator shaft housing that was broken at the start of the video. So I'm going to glue this to the agitator plate, and that will seal this for sure off from any ingress of water. So the rougher the surface finish, the better that glue is going to stick anyways. Not the end of the world for me personally. I hope to be getting a more accurate tool post than that one, just so when I drop in the quick change tools into the tool post, they're already in the right position. Now, the solution to my roller issue is to have a viewer contact me magically and offer to send me some parts from an extra washing machine that they had lying around. It's extremely smooth. So it was an amazing offer that I obviously had to take him up on, and I thank him greatly for taking the effort to do this type of thing. Because where else am I going to find rollers? I was thinking I could maybe buy some large rubber rods that matched the almost 3-inch diameter that we needed and turn them down on the lathe. But I could only find black, and finding white was very, very difficult than I thought. Maybe I could put an insane amount of shrink tubing, like a large shrink tube that's white, or I could buy a thin sheet of the white rubber and wrap that around the black tubing. It's just, I'm glad I just found it. This is me trying to repair that shaft that I drilled into. My current welder is a giant piece of garbage. It is flux. No, it's not Fluxor. It's like a MIG, and it only has 4 power settings. It's just high and low, and then high and low on each of the high or the low. It's horrendous. So for this repair, it wasn't ideal. It really made me think about getting a real welder, because it might be time. The good thing is it doesn't really matter. This is not an aesthetic part, it is a functional part. So as long as the function is there, I am totally fine with the repair as is. I do wish that that entire part was made out of stainless steel, because even though it's driving the rollers, I feel like it could... the water could get in there when it's wringing out water out of whatever clothes you were washing. Same with the roller shafts; those really should be stainless steel, as they would be exposed to water fairly often. But I guess that just wasn't an option at the time of manufacture. What can you do? I made a new cork gasket, much better than the paper one, only because this is where we had to do some welding, and even though I did sand and try to get the bottom of this as flat as possible, I'm not entirely confident that I have, the greatest mating surface of all time, just due to the difference in castings. So the cork gasket's going to go in place. It is the correct thickness to match up with the gearing. So that is totally fine with me personally. They don't make replacement gaskets for these, unlike I found for the motor restoration. So all the gaskets that are needed in this machine are going to have to be made entirely by me. And I am one of the greatest gasket makers of all time. Might be top 10. this large white part here is what houses the rack for the rack and pinion, as well as the lever arm for the on and off switch that I'm tightening on the other end here. The lever arm's adjustable, so you can adjust it so it only turns one way, the agitator, which I'm not entirely sure why you would need that, but that's an option apparently. So this is the new clean gearbox. I am going to be going extremely light on the grease, like just enough, because I don't have the grease that I need. I wanted to find the original Maytag grease, which does come up for sale sometimes. I've seen it on eBay. I kind of want to use the original grease in this, but I just couldn't find it in time for this assembly. That's fine. This amount of grease is totally fine. Nothing in here is moving at any high speed or containing any large amounts of force that are going to erode anything. So I'm completely fine with that. Plus, how often am I going to be running this thing? Not that often. Although I do want to use it to wash shop rags. It's just going to take, a very little abuse over the rest of its life, at least until I die, because I'm keeping this forever. There's another fantastic gasket experience. And this is just the top plate. This should seal all of the oil/grease in. I realize, when they include a gasket like that, I'm assuming they don't want oil to leak or grease to come out, so it's probably meant to be filled with a large amount of grease, which makes more sense. That bronze bushing at the top there was adequately fine for what we needed to do in this case for a washing machine, so I'm not concerned about replacing that. I did replace the other bronze bushings where needed. If there's just a little too much slop, then I'll show you. If not, then I won't show you in this case, since this video could easily have been 6 hours. But I don't know. Do you have 6 hours to watch a man slowly devolve into insanity as he reassembles a antique washing machine with no instructions? Maybe you do. So this part right here, that little disc that is not painted, that cast iron disc, controls the angle, and you can see the positions where the rod would slide into, controls the angle or position of the wringer. You can position it over the washing machine tub directly, so that when you're wringing stuff out, it wrings the water into the tub, or you can spin it all the way around to the outside of the tub so that the water would fall onto the floor or the grass or wherever you were using this thing. So I guess a lot of people used it for different things, but, and this is a great but, I don't have these and I'd love to find them, but this machine also had options available for a meat grinder. So you would want to have that position option pointing out of the tub when you were grinding meat, or maybe in the tub. Maybe you want to grind the meat into the tub. I know it's ridiculous, but just kind of think of it as, instead of the wringer, there would be a meat grinder. There was also a butter churn option that you would put in the tub itself in place of the agitator, and you could churn your butter as much as you needed. So if that doesn't give you kind of a sign of the times, then I don't know what does. This was an expensive machine. Not every home was able to afford this, so if you did invest in one of these, it would be nice to have some of those other options available to you. It's just, when you go to the store to buy a washing machine, I feel like you're not asking if it has a butter churn or meat grinding option anymore. Although I should start doing that and just go to my local appliance store and ask which washing machine has the meat grinder or the butter churn option. And let me say this, if it has a butter churn option, then it has an ice cream making option, basically, okay? This machine is just, it's the KitchenAid stand mixer of 1927 appliances. Now you can see how the springs lock the top Maytag plate down, and that pushes the two rollers together, and that's what the springs do. And when I screw the springs tighter or looser, that would adjust how tightly the rollers press against each other. So you could have it very light for when you're making pasta, or you could have it really hard when you're wringing out clothes. So it's very, very versatile machine. You can see the light amount of grease I put on the gearing here. Just enough is all that I need. And it moves again, so that made me happy. I was worried that, I don't know, there's some hidden part that deteriorated into absolutely nothingness but rust that I was missing, and then this thing wouldn't work. That was my greatest fear, and I spent a lot of time making sure that every part that was supposed to be there was actually there. And if it wasn't, then I would source that or make it. Because with something this massively corroded, you just have no idea. Like maybe there was supposed to be a gear in the middle of this thing and turned to dust. I have no idea. So if it wasn't for the literature, I would probably have gone insane trying to figure this out, because it's a puzzle, and puzzles are fun, and that's part of why I like doing this. But this puzzle would have been one of the greatest puzzles of all time. Along with why muffins with icing are now called cupcakes. I don't know. I don't know about that. Stresses me out. This is the pin with a brand new spring that helps kind of lock in or secure the position of the handle, just so it, through vibration, it doesn't move to the on or off position by itself. It's not ideal, so I'm glad they included that. As you can see, painting things white is a genius idea when you're dealing with grease and metal. That I didn't really think it would get that dirty, but luckily it's just surface and you can wipe that off. But here you can see the kind of lock positions, and when you press down against those little teeth, that raises the bar or the shaft, and then you could move the ringer to a new slotted location, let go of the handle, and the shaft would drop right back in due to the spring mechanism internally. I almost forgot to put on the little drainage plate that very interestingly kind of switches positions based on the direction of turn for the roller, which is a neat design. Also, the viewer that sent me the rollers and any of the other parts, the cast broken parts that are now not broken, found one extra bearing. So it sounds way worse even though I oiled it. But it's original, so I'm going with that over the modern bearing, even though the modern bearing was much, much smoother. Now for the final touches, we put the spring for the on and off switch. This is just a cap. I guess you could fill the grease or oil in from there quickly. And the other cap was kind of the idle brake, I believe. This would also, I guess, stop it from moving when the machine is in idle. It's just a piece of wood that presses against the main, almost like a brake that presses against that main hub that's in there. It's an interesting design. Here's the fancy oiler looking much, much better. It came with this interesting spiral with a skewer in the middle that would go down the oil hole thing, and then I just filled this with oil and positioned it over the rack and pinion gearing. This thing did originally come with casters through the tubing like this, so I just very quickly tack welded a few brand new casters together, and now it's much more easy to move around the shop. Plus, it looks more original. It would be nice to find the original casters, but just like everything else in this restoration, you get what you get when you get it. So maybe over time, this will become the Megazord of restorations as I piece together more and more original parts. But for now, it's over 90% there anyways. I made these little J bolts out of just threaded rod that I heated up and bent. And then these flat washers have a rubber washer underneath, and that secures the restored motor to the actual washing machine itself. And that should be fine. I've seen it done online, so I just kind of copied that design the best I could. There's the agitator going in. Everything spins freely with no noise, other than the noise of this aggressive angle grinder. I'm using a Scotch-Brite pad on the angle grinder just to get it a little better than what I have here. But I just can't do a full polish on this thing. It's not humanly possible. By humanly, I mean me personally. It's too much. It's too much. If I sneezed on it, it would scratch, and then I would cry. So I'm not even going to put myself in that position of anxiety. Since I am going to be throwing shop rags and keeping this in the shop, it's going to get dinged up, the tub itself. So I'm just leaving it as just lightly polished, let's say. These decals came in finally. It's part of the reason why it's been so long since my previous videos. But it took a while for these to come in. These were purchased directly off of eBay by the same person who supplied the replacement parts for the motor, for the Maytag engine restoration. So these look fantastic. Very happy with these. I was concerned that they wouldn't look appropriate. They would be a little maybe low resolution or something like that. But it really does put the finishing touch on this that makes it look very nice. I think, at least. Here you can see me hooking up the water line to the hose, and then the tub starting to fill up with glorious water. And now we try and start it. The moment of truth. Oh. Listen to its gloriousness. There's it moving back and forth. Everything's in place. Nothing's exploding. Nothing's leaking. That was kind of my number one concern, since there was so much corrosion. The agitator is agitating, as it should, back and forth. I'm going to add a little soap and throw in some stuff to wash. I'll leave it in just for a little bit for testing purposes. And see how it goes. These are just random shop rags. I always buy a pack of these rags at the store when they're on sale. They're just like old t-shirts and weird things like that. They do come in handy, and they're good for removing the lead off of stripped paint. So now I'm activating the rollers, and you can immediately hear the engine firing more often, and that's because there's an increased load on it. And that's something that hit and miss engines you can notice very, very easily. And it's ringing like an anvil. Okay. It actually came out surprisingly dry. That was a very impressive ringing system. The black one is a softer rubber, and the white one is a harder rubber. And I guess they work in tandem to kind of adjust on different bumps and heights and thicknesses. So it worked out really well. I understand the drainage plate now. I kind of like that this one drains, this angle drains into the tub, but I guess some people would want to drain the dirty water out of the thing and not put it right back into the system. Now it's off. It works. The part that was broken on the motor is fixed, and everything is glorious. I'm a happy, happy man. I really hope you enjoyed this one. This took a lot of work, and I'm excited to keep this around and play with it as much as I can, because I absolutely love this thing. I'll see you all in the next one. Later.